Welcome to this explainer, where we're going to tackle one of the internet's absolute favorite mysteries using nothing but the facts. Look, for years now, social media has been totally flooded with these mind-bending claims about a certain long-running yellow cartoon family. You've definitely seen the posts, the wild side-by-side comparisons, the whole shebang. Well, today, we are stripping away all those internet rumors. We're going to look at the actual evidence and figure out exactly what is going on behind the scenes. So let's dive right into this viral myth. People look at incredibly specific scenes from the 1990s, compare them to major global events that happened decades later, and they legitimately ask, are these writers time travelers? Do they have a crystal ball hiding in the writer's room? Or is there a logical, completely reality-based explanation for how a comedy show just seems to constantly predict the future? Here's how we're going to break this down today. 1. The time travel myth itself. 2. Science and technology explained. 3. Politics and historical context. 4. Pop culture and coincidences. And finally, number 5, the real secret revealed. All right, jumping in to section 1, the time travel myth, the illusion of foresight. The sheer scale of these claims is honestly what makes them so believable. We are talking about predicting a $9 billion scientific discovery, massive shifts in everyday technology, and even the election of a U.S. president, supposedly broadcast right into our living rooms decades before any of it actually happened. It sounds completely impossible, right? And honestly, that's exactly why this conspiracy spreads like wildfire. Moving on to section 2, science and technology explained, formulas and picture phones. Okay, this one is genuinely fascinating. How on earth does a cartoon supposedly solve the God particle years before the Large Hadron Collider did over in Geneva? In a 1998 episode, Homer is playing an inventor, and he's scribbling this massive equation on a chalkboard. Then you look at the 2012 real-world discovery of the Higgs boson particle. The internet absolutely lost its mind because that formula on Homer's board is actually a calculation for the mass of the Higgs boson. It looks like an impossible prediction. How could a comedy writer know this 14 years before a $9 billion super collider confirmed it? Well, it's not magic. The truth is all about the incredibly highly educated background of the show's writing staff. The guy who wrote that episode, David X. Cohen, wasn't just your average comedy writer. The man was a physicist. He held a master's in computer science and a PhD in mathematics. When he was drafting this scene, he wanted the math on that chalkboard to look legit. So he literally just picked up the phone, called his scientist buddies who were already deep into researching the Higgs boson, and asked them for a plausible formula. Sure, it wasn't perfectly accurate at a microscopic particle level, but it was a highly educated inclusion by an actual physicist. And you know, this perfectly illustrates how easily historical context just vanishes online. Take the famous claim that the show predicted FaceTime and smartwatches 15 years early in a 1995 episode. If we actually trace the timeline back, AT&T literally installed picture phone booths in public way back in 1964. The whole project was eventually shut down in '73 because, well, it just didn't catch on. So when the show featured a video call in 1995, the writers were actually making a joke about an existing retro piece of mid-century technology. They weren't magically predicting Apple's 2010 FaceTime. They were looking backward, but because most of us forgot about those 1960s picture phones, it feels like they were looking into the future. Which brings us right into section 3, politics and historical context. Current events, not future events. Now we have to talk about perhaps the most famous claim of them all. The viral myth says that back in the year 2000, the show predicted Donald Trump's presidency completely out of nowhere, just a wild random guess. But when you look at the historical reality, it paints a completely different picture. Just 1 year prior, in 1999, Trump had actually launched a massive, highly publicized campaign for the Reform Party nomination. We are talking about a campaign where he spent nearly $100 million. He was doing interviews, he was all over the news. So the writers simply made a satirical joke about a news story that was already dominating 1999, just imagining what the country would look like if that highly publicized campaign had gone all the way. But wait, what about that insanely accurate animated clip of him waving on the escalator? People constantly share that video, claiming it was broadcast in the year 2000. Well, actually, scratch that, it wasn't. That specific animation was from a short titled Trumptastic Voyage, and it was created in 2015, after he had already done his real-life escalator ride. The animators were simply mocking an event that had quite literally just happened on live television. But internet users falsely relabeled the video's date to manufacture a fake prediction. Let's look at another historical parallel. A 1994 episode shows the school cook secretly serving up horse meat to the students. Fast forward 19 years to 2013, and Europe is hit with a massive, real-world horse meat scandal in their supermarkets. Crazy prediction, right? Actually, no. If you dig back into mid-century history, around 1951, there were huge public protests over horse meat shops opening up for human consumption. It was a massive cultural taboo at the time. That 1994 joke was directly inspired by those past historical protests. It had absolutely nothing to do with the eventual 2013 scandal. History just happens to repeat itself. And here is another amazing example of how reading the daily news beats reading a crystal ball every single time. People swear the 2007 movie predicted the 2013 Edward Snowden NSA leaks because there's a big joke about the government listening in on everyone's phone calls. But let's check the timeline. In 2005, the New York Times published a massive front-page report about the Bush administration's NSA wiretapping program. It was everywhere. 2 years later, the movie writers tossed in a joke about it. They weren't predicting 2013, they were literally just reading the 2005 newspaper.
All right, let's hit section 4, pop culture and coincidences. Mergers, music, and fakes.
So in 1998, an episode briefly showed a sign stating that 20th Century Fox was a division of Walt Disney. 19 years later, in 2017, Disney actually buys Fox for an unbelievable $71 billion. Was this incredible foresight? Not quite. The writer of that exact episode actually tweeted about this, calling it just a funny happenstance. You see, back in 1996, Disney had just made massive headlines for buying ABC. The writers just made a logical, satirical leap. Hey, if Disney is buying up ABC today, maybe they'll just buy Fox tomorrow. It was a quick joke about corporate monopolies that eventually, purely by chance, came true.
Now, what about Lady Gaga? In a 2012 episode, she is animated flying over a cheering crowd in a wire harness. 5 years later, she does the exact same thing at the Super Bowl. But here is the critical piece of info the internet conveniently leaves out. Lady Gaga actually guest starred in that 2012 episode. She recorded the voiceover herself, and she actively worked with the animators to design that specific flying stunt, because that's how she wanted to be portrayed. 5 years later, she literally just recreated her own idea in real life. You guys, it's not a prediction when you're the one who planned the whole thing. What about the 2010 episode that seemingly predicted Bengt Holmstrom winning the Nobel Prize in Economics a full decade later? Well, his name wasn't just presented as some singular magical guess out of thin air. It was written on a nerd betting sheet right alongside Jagdish Bhagwati and about 18 other incredibly prominent, highly qualified experts in their fields. The writers simply knew who the absolute leading minds in contract theory were at the time. Choosing his name wasn't some kind of wizardry. It was a highly educated statistical guess. If you list 20 of the smartest economists on the planet, yeah, one of them is probably going to win a Nobel Prize eventually. Then we have to talk about the pure tragic coincidences. In 1997, an episode featured a magazine cover holding up a $9 bus ticket right next to the New York skyline, specifically the Twin Towers, which visually created a 9/11. The creators have officially addressed this one. At that time, $9 was literally just the realistic bus fare, and the Twin Towers were simply the most iconic, prominent buildings you could possibly use to represent New York City on a graphic. It was nothing more than an eerie, completely unintentional visual coincidence.
And finally, we have to recognize the outright lies. Claims that the show predicted the exact date of Queen Elizabeth's passing or the coronavirus pandemic, those are 100% internet fakes. Trolls literally just find a retro episode that featured some fictional sickness, like the Osaka flu. They fire up Photoshop, type the word coronavirus right over the original broadcast art, post it online, and just wait for it to go viral. It's deception, plain and simple, strictly for the clicks.
So that brings us to our final section, number 5, the real secret revealed. Observation, not divination.
Let's pull back the curtain here. The true formula behind the show's incredible foresight is simply observation and education. This writing room is packed with brilliant academics. We're talking people with PhDs in math and masters in science. They have a deep daily engagement with the news and current events, using satirical observation to constantly poke fun at real-world history and culture. Combine that high-level awareness with mathematical probability, making hundreds of educated guesses over 30 straight years of television, and yeah, they're bound to get a few things right. And for literally everything else, it's just the internet manipulating context, altering dates, and outright fabricating images to keep this myth alive. We've seen exactly how easily facts get twisted for views. This show isn't written by time travelers. It's written by really smart people who are paying close attention to the world around them. So the biggest thing you should take away from this explainer is the sheer importance of media literacy.
The very next time you see a crazy viral prediction pop up online, what are you going to do? Will you just buy into the myth, or will you take a quick second to look for the historical context behind the joke? Always remember to question the narrative and seek out the real source material. Thanks so much for joining me on this deep dive, and stay curious.